Have you ever heard of a fairy so twisted, so horrifying, that she doesn't leave coins under pillows? She leaves nightmares? This isn't the tooth fairy story you grew up with. Tonight, we're diving into a terrifying tale of children disappearing, leaving nothing behind but their teeth. By the end of this story, you'll never think of fairies the same way again. It all started in the quiet town of Willow Creek, nestled in the middle of a dense forest. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and doors were rarely locked. But that all changed when children began to vanish. At first, it was just one or two. A toddler who wandered too far, a kid who didn't come home from school. The town's residents thought it was a string of unfortunate accidents. But then, parents began waking up to find tiny piles of teeth on their children's pillows, and whispers of something sinister spread through the town. One of those parents was Sarah Miller, a single mother to 8-year-old Olivia. Olivia had always been a bright, bubbly child, but lately she'd been having terrible nightmares. She spoke of a shadowy figure that visited her at night, a woman with hollow eyes and a wide, toothy grin. "She told me she's coming for my smile," Olivia whispered one morning, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Sarah brushed it off as just a bad dream. But when Olivia's first tooth fell out, things took a darker turn. That night, Sarah placed the tooth under Olivia's pillow and reassured her that the tooth fairy would leave something special. But when Sarah checked on her daughter the next morning, the tooth was gone, and in its place was a small pile of dirt mixed with shards of bone. Olivia was pale, her eyes sunken, and she said she'd seen the woman again. "She's waiting," Olivia murmured, barely audible. Terrified, Sarah confided in her neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Whitaker, who'd lived in Willow Creek his whole life. When Sarah described the figure Olivia had seen, his face darkened. "That's the Hollow Fairy," he said in a grave tone. "She's no fairy at all. She's a creature from the old stories, older than this town. They say she feeds on children's teeth because they hold their innocence, their essence. Once she takes enough, she takes the child too." Sarah's skepticism melted into fear as Mr. Whitaker shared more about the legend. The Hollow Fairy, he explained, was drawn to places where belief in her was strong. She'd once terrorized a neighboring village centuries ago, and it was said that the only way to stop her was to confront her in the place where she was strongest, the woods. Desperate to protect her daughter, Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. She stayed awake that night, watching over Olivia's bed. At exactly 3 a.m., the temperature in the room dropped. The shadows seemed to stretch and ripple, and then, from the corner of the room, she emerged. The Hollow Fairy was unlike anything Sarah could have imagined. Her body was gaunt and twisted, her eyes like empty sockets, and her mouth was filled with rows of jagged teeth that glistened as if they were freshly plucked. Sarah froze in terror as the Hollow Fairy moved closer to Olivia, her long, bony fingers reaching out. But just as she was about to touch the sleeping child, Sarah screamed and lunged forward. The Hollow Fairy let out an unearthly screech and vanished, leaving behind a cold gust of wind and the faint scent of decay. The next morning, Sarah knew what she had to do. Armed with a flashlight and Mr. Whitaker's old hunting knife, she ventured into the woods. Olivia's stuffed rabbit was clutched tightly in her hand, a beacon to draw the Hollow Fairy out. The deeper she went, the darker the forest seemed to grow. The trees twisted into unnatural shapes, and the air was heavy with a strange, oppressive silence. Hours passed before Sarah found the clearing. In the center stood an ancient oak tree, its trunk hollow and filled with tiny, glinting objects, teeth, hundreds, maybe thousands of them. The ground around the tree was littered with tiny shoes, toys, and other remnants of the children who had disappeared. As Sarah approached the tree, a chilling voice echoed around her. "You've come to offer yourself?" The Hollow Fairy stepped out from the shadows, her grin wider than ever. "Your daughter's teeth were delicious, but her fear was divine." Rage and terror boiled within Sarah, but she stood her ground. "You're not taking her," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The Hollow Fairy laughed, a sound that seemed to shake the very ground. "You think you can stop me? I am older than the stars, mortal. Your kind are nothing but cattle to me." But Sarah wasn't backing down. She remembered Mr. Whitaker's words. The hollow fairy was strongest in the woods, but that also meant it was her only weakness. Summoning all her courage, Sarah grabbed the stuffed rabbit and threw it into the hollow of the tree. The hollow fairy shrieked as the object burst into flames, the fire spreading rapidly to the rest of the tree. The air filled with an ear-piercing wail as the hollow fairy tried to flee, but the flames consumed her. The clearing lit up with an unnatural light and then silence. The tree was gone, leaving behind a blackened patch of earth and the faint scent of burned wood. Sarah stumbled back to town, clutching Olivia tightly. The nightmares stopped, and the children of Willow Creek were safe once more. But to this day, the legend of the hollow fairy lives on, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows. If you're still with me and want more terrifying tales like this, hit that subscribe button, and if you dare, check out the next story. It's one you won't forget.